Hey, Safi, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.
You're doing a lot of things these days. Tell me a little about what you're up to.
Yeah, so I'm kind of staying busy. I feel like every no 2 days are the same, and that's exactly what I want. So my time is spent in one of two ways. So about 30% of my time is spent with my clients from my agency Hyperbeam. I'm helping founders and funds with their fundraising and their sales narrative. So it's just been really great to work on them with their strategic positioning in this like really tough market. I think messaging now is more important than ever before. Really being able to stand out from the crowd can come down to just the difference of one or two words. So it's just been really rewarding to work with founders at this time. But I think the reason that I'm here today and what I spend most of my time on is my new newsletter called the Physicality, where I cover the strategies of real world companies. So think, legacy businesses like Wawa, In and Out, and then sort of up and comers like Blank Street and Kindred. I talk about their scaling approach, their product, kind of how they've been able to you know stand out again, that word stand out in this busy market, this crowded time, and really grow, or in some cases stay alive over 100 years. So that's kind of how I'm spending my time these days. It's been a huge difference from my previous lives.
It's so interesting. I mean, we were mentioning there's all this craze, you and I were talking there's all this craze about, looking at like the latest technology companies and, different sectors, and that's where all the attention's going. But you've kind of taken a different path, right? Like you mentioned, and you're looking at, hey, here's all the brands that we're very familiar with and we've enjoyed for a long time, right? Decades sometimes or beyond. How do they work? How do they get there? How are they continuing to innovate and stay fresh and have brand lift with their customers? It seems like that's what you focus on.
Yep.
What was the what
Yeah,
was
I
the
think.
you towards that?
Yeah, I think it was deliberate, to be honest with you. I'd like to say that I've sort of stumbled upon it by accident, but I had been working at this high growth crypto company for about 6 months. It was sort of had all the hallmarks of a successful Silicon Valley tech startup. Second time founder, rising market, great investors. It just seemed like it couldn't lose, and unfortunately, the company decided to pivot a few months after I had joined. And when I was sort of out on the street, if you will, not really, but without a job, I kind of stopped and looked at the world, and I was looking for the pockets of places that people weren't talking about at the time. I think after 18 straight months of crypto, we sort of diversified into artificial intelligence and sustainability, and uh, there was like only a few other things that I felt like were in the mainstream paradigm, either on Twitter or LinkedIn, the mainstream media. And I was like, I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the real world right now. I was noticing things like people are spending their time differently in the real world. Like, think about all the rise of entertainment. So like Top Golf and these ping pong places and pickleball. And there's just like these sort of like activities and sports and axe throwing and just different ways that people were spending their time, uh, dovetailed with things like people are drinking less than ever before. And I was like, there's stuff going on, like the pandemic's over, people are lonely. I had this like itch on the back of my neck that people are going to be spending their times more and more in the real world than on the internet. And that's kind of like a total change in mainstream narrative. I just was like, I don't think anyone's paying attention to this in a meaningful way. And I think there's a lot of action happening. And so that's sort of why I decided to move away from talking about high growth software companies and looking at them like I did when I was back in the venture world, and focusing on these slower moving but still incredibly impressive enterprises like Wawa, but also these relatively, slow moving to the rest of the world, but really impressive early stage real estate companies. And so that's what I kind of decided to double down on that.
A true contrarian, right? Like as we say, it's less about what you're doing and more about is everybody else doing it, right? Is how I define being a contrarian. I think it's pretty much the definition. And that's fascinating that you saw that. You saw there was all this noise, all this attention on these emerging sectors. And that happens, right? I mean, like even within crypto, you see this happen where it becomes extremely popular and it's almost a worse time to be focused on it because there's so much noise and there feels like there's not a lot of opportunity. And then,
Mm.
obviously you go into this change of focus, right, where it suddenly isn't. And I didn't even think about that with more traditional businesses and brands like you're mentioning until you said it, where it's like, of course, right now that we have all this AI and technical focus and technology focus, nobody's really like kind of centering their laser sights on those businesses, and so there's probably a huge amount of opportunity there.
I think so. And I'm not personally in a position to invest in that yet, but I am in a position to observe and try to make sense of it. I just take a company like Blank Street, which some of your audience may not know, but is really popular here in New York. It's a series of coffee shops, kind of small format as we call them. So think like a couple hundred square feet. And over the pandemic, they suddenly just blanketed the city. And as someone that's been here for a couple of years and an avid Starbucks user, I definitely paid attention when this coffee shop chain just started popping up all over the city. It seemed like you couldn't go a block without finding it. And I was like, how is a company like this scaling during the pandemic? Like it makes it again, it's what did they call it? A narrative violation. That's really what it was. And so it's kind of the first example I had of let me look a layer deeper here. And as I've been going through businesses like these, understanding that creating and scaling a company in the real world where there's physical constraints and doing it properly and like actually winning business, to me is becoming more impressive than scaling a software business or selling selling a new token, because there's there's no cost of distribution in the internet, but there is like really no switching costs in the real world. So like what's stopping me if I'm Starbucks, what's stopping me from going across the street, for my customers going across the street into Blank Street and sort of like winning that business. And so that those sorts of like very basic, relatively basic business ideas started, really materializing in the real world in a way that I just didn't feel like was materializing on the internet. So that's kind of what made me sort of look at this much closer.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Do you have another example that's really impressed you?
I think something that people aren't paying much attention to is this idea of getting more out of our existing spaces. Um, there's been like ebbs and flows of this, but if you look at stuff that's going on in the broader real estate market, of course, WeWork's bankruptcy is top of mind. This space exists in the real world. Like you can't just like shelve it. It's not like a Notion document. You can't put it in the archives. Like it's out there and it has intrinsic value, but that value needs to be activated. And so I think we're going to start to see these sort of vacant real estate spaces be used in new and interesting ways. I don't think it can be like a straight takeover. Like we're going to turn this WeWork into a department store. I think it's going to be something more nuanced than that. I think it's going to be, do we convert this into short-term hoteling? Do we convert it into affordable housing? Do we think about, breaking it up into a new type of office space? one company that I really enjoyed working with was this one called Kindred. It's a Series A prop tech company, Andreessen backed. They're doing a home swap network. So, Mike, where do you live?
Denver.
Denver. So, Mike, you have a Denver apartment. I have a New York apartment. You and I go on the Kindred platform and we do a direct house swap for a certain period of time. We
Mm.
don't exchange any value between us, but you get to stay here for 3 days, and I stay in your spot for 3 days, and it's a sort of like really cool, novel concept of value exchange, like actual one-to-one sharing without any sort of like money being transferred in between us. And so I worked with the founder on sort of explaining the ramifications of this business. And it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what can happen when, you and I decide to exchange or share assets. I actually saw a lot of parallels to the crypto world when I was working on something like this, because a lot of the idea of Web3 was take out the intermediary and let's just have a direct value exchange between you and I. And that sort of theme played really nicely into working on this piece. In fact, I'd worked on a piece a couple of years ago called Communities Will Decentralize the Built World. And this seems like, even though it's not a Web3 company, this seemed like to be an early sign of we're starting to figure out what happens when we take out the intermediary and we just say, hey, you have something that I want, and the other way around, let's figure out a way to sort of make it happen.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I could see, you as you were articulating, all these new experiences. I could see a real argument for, with a lot of more people working from home, you don't get really any of that social interaction that you would rely on to get at work, right? And obviously, like, you socially interact virtually, but it's just different, right? It's different to interact with other people in person. And so I could see those experiences and that being built into these more traditional businesses, or there being disruption of other business models based on that fact, that you mentioned. You're like, you just said it, like, people are lonely, right? And it used to be you went to work, you were surrounded by people, and especially if you were maybe an introvert, that would get overwhelming. You couldn't wait to go home and kind of be alone and relax. But now you're just at home relaxing alone all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a question there?
No, just a statement, just a reflection.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
No, I agree with you. I think the loneliness part is a major driver of what I am exploring with this newsletter. I haven't quite delved into like the loneliness epidemic, but it's ever present and it sort of permeates like so many of the companies that I talk about, which we can definitely get into. But I think it is. I think about it all the time.
yeah, I'm sure you're not alone. You mentioned earlier you're not in a position right now where you're investing financially in these trends, but you're paying attention to them, and what should hustlers, thinkers, and builders who also can't financially invest in these trends, what should they do with that information? Where's the opportunity?
I think one of the ways that I took advantage was to go out and try to make sense of the world by creating content. This I never thought that I was going to be a writer by profession, but one of the reasons why I deliberately decided to create content by observing these trends was it's multifaceted, but one of the more sort of actionable things about it was, all right, say we're 18 months down the line, the market's shifted. I've already sort of sowed the seeds of a lot of my ideas, and I've built a lot of the relationships that I wanted to with operators like the Kindred team or in like real estate investors. And so 18 months from now, who knows kind of what my financial situation is going to be at, I've sort of like laid the groundwork in many ways to take advantage of this sort of new paradigm. And I would say if you're interested in investing in some of these trends that I write about, I think building those relationships are super crucial to do right now, so it doesn't seem like you're some sort of like fast follower. You know, a few months from now, a year from now, I think if this stuff is simple, right? Like we're writing about these real estate companies, I've realized that it's very simple, these businesses, but it's not easy. They have succeeded in many cases. The later stage ones specifically have succeeded by finding like one or two key insights of what their customers really want, and then building the entire business around that. And I would say that like for you to spot those one to two key differences and see how you can apply it to uh, the next generation of real estate companies is it's easier said than done. So I would just spend this time like doing a lot of learning and a lot of listening before you sort of go out and decide to deploy capital.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you think about your own funnel with your newsletter? How are you building that? How are you forming those relationships? And then should everyone have a newsletter? I know it's, it's an up and coming trend. You're starting to see this become extremely popular. Do you think it's for everyone?
No, I hate to put it like that off the bat, but one of the reasons I did a newsletter as well versus say what you're doing with the podcast, video form content, I went with a newsletter for a few reasons. One, I think it's one of the only formats that lets you truly explore your curiosity. Like I'm writing 3,000 to 4,000 words about why In and Out is the most like high margin fast food company in existence and how it keeps its prices so low. I think like 3,000 to 4,000 words was what was needed to understand it, for me to understand it in a way that like I feel like I'd be taking a lot of shortcuts if I did video or something else. And so I think like picking the content type that meets like it's like the right form factor for what you're trying to do. I think really hard about that. I think in terms of generating content, I mean, it's the same reason that you're doing it. I think it increases the surface area for luck in a way it's just like almost magical. It almost seems like a cheat code. Like you have like, you're playing some game on the PlayStation and you suddenly understand that like if I press these buttons, then I'm gonna have some sort of power up. And that's exactly how I feel about it. I only have a few hundred subscribers. Like it's not wide, but my subscriber base is phenomenal and they are people of import. And I'd rather be, respected by these few hundred than have the attention of a few thousand. And that's kind of always sort of going through my mind as I write is like, I don't care if it actually isn't accretive if this goes wide. I just need it to go really deep, and I need it to be, be seen by the right people. And so far, I've been able to control for that, and it's already proving dividends in the relationships that I've been able to build because of it.
Is it a two-way relationship in any way?
So I did something a little contrarian with my newsletter, according to my sources. I reach out to every single new subscriber, like personally, not just like an auto email. I do research on everybody, and I reach out to them. Usually, it's really easy because they're working on something fascinating. They're either have some cool company or they're some interesting investor, and having the newsletter, it's almost like they self-selected into being interested in me, right? And so it makes the conversation flow like so much easier, instead of me doing some cold outreach. And I schedule calls with them. Like I just got off, I've done 3 back to back today of my subscribers. And so I think one of the ways that I'm thinking about this newsletter is I'm treating it like a product, right? I'm doing customer calls, right? I'm doing outreach. I'm trying to, I'm trying to deepen the funnel, if you will. And I don't know exactly why I'm doing this, to be honest with you. I just think that it's important to meet the people that are interested in the type of content that I produce, because it sort of like has a higher probability of being someone that I actually want to hang out with. And so every Friday I write a summary of all the people that I talked to, and what we talked about. And it it's just like it's pretty marvelous, who spends 30 minutes with me now versus, even just a year ago. All because I write 3,000 words every other week. It's again, like I said, it's a cheat code.
Well, yeah, I mean, first, I want to highlight how unique that is that you are reaching out to every subscriber. I think that's awesome. And
Thanks.
secondly, it makes tremendous amount of sense. I mean, getting that feedback right in a conversation and being able to establish that connection, that's only going to help you go wherever you want to go.
I think I just thought about it as you would be trained to think about building a product. Like
Right.
if I reach out to this customer, this subscriber in this case, is like, there's a better chance that I understand why they subscribed, where they came from, what they care about, what types of content that they liked and disliked. Like I just got off with a subscriber before this, and she's like, I really like your short form content that came out this morning. Your in and out piece to me was a bit, long winded. And I wish there was a better way for me to make sense of it and like get through it, more digestibly. And now I'm sitting here like thinking like, okay, cool. Like what's a way that I can structure it that makes it easier for her? And obviously she's just one of many subscribers, and maybe there's a subscriber that has a different opinion. But now I have some data. And I think also the more selfish reason, to be completely honest with you guys, is like there's a better chance that they'll stay and that they'll engage with my content, and they will wait longer and longer to hit that, consider hitting that unsubscribe button than the next newsletter. And it's just like, just like how you would build a relationship with a customer for a product so they don't churn. I'm doing the same thing with this newsletter.
I love that. I think that's awesome. I think in general, entrepreneurs miss the mark. I mean, this is the lean startup process, right? Where you need to interview your customers and compile that data and look for trends. And that's essentially, like you said, how you build a really delightful product. And I love that you're doing that intuitively in a space that I don't think almost anybody's doing that.
I think it's a really missed opportunity, especially for those that are just starting out. Like, think about the millions, billions pieces of content out there that your subscriber could be engaging with, and they're choosing to spend their life force, their attention, their time on this earth with your content. Like, it's a huge responsibility. Like, for you to sort of shepherd that relationship. And I think that, you owe it to them and to yourself to build a relationship with them and make it long lasting. And so, if for those that are out there thinking about going down this path and maybe not being a whole content entrepreneur like I am, I think it's important that you still sort of treat it with the same, with a certain sort of reverence, because it actually is, it's more important than meets the surface, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, this is the art, right, to product market fit is you have to muster up the courage to ask for that critical feedback. And then I've found it's like even beyond that, you have to build a rapport where you're actually going to get that feedback, right? And how do you do that? How have you like approached kind of drawing out the criticisms that you mentioned that you were able to get from one of your subscribers?
I think it helps a lot that my writing style itself is quite transparent. You take a look at any of my posts and you'll realize that this isn't really business analysis. It's more business entertainment. Like, I use a lot of puns. I use a lot of inappropriate jokes. I really don't take myself or my writing too seriously. That doesn't detract from like my analysis itself. I think, you know, frankly, it's quite spot on and it's been received quite well. But I think it starts with the content itself, and people sort of have their guard down based on the content, right? Like, if you're kind of seen as a more serious character, like a real, like, investment banking analyst, or, then your customers, your readers will kind of take you for that type of person. And so I made a deliberate choice to move away from another contrarian thought, I guess, now that we're on the subject, is I decided to move away from other business newsletters and just treat it from like first principles. Like, what makes me want to share content? What makes me want to talk about stuff that I just read that day? Oh, it's stuff that I enjoyed, that I'm entertained by, and that I found interesting. And so I wanted to kind of take all that together and make that as part of the key part of the product. And so it starts there. And so, and in my outreach to them, it's also very informal, right? It's like almost like I'm talking to an old friend than a new relationship. And I don't know if it's just a matter of setting the tone that way, or those that decide to subscribe are like that, but we get right into it. Like, my first meetings with these folks are way more interesting. Like, they're immediately just like the most intellectually deep discussions that I've had in ages. And I would say 99% of the time, it's just like, it's just instantaneous. It's just like we picked up where we left off because they have this context on me, and because of my voice. And so I think the takeaway here is like that thing about authenticity. Like, don't ignore what makes you particularly special when you're deciding to be a content entrepreneur, because your success will come from that authenticity. In a world where like artificial intelligence is making content so much more vanilla and watered down and form factor, if anyone's used ChatGPT, like, what I'm talking about, the more you sound less like a robot and more like a human being, I think that's like going to be the only way to have your content stand out in the future. I think the time for cookie cutter, technical business sounding content is in the past, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, do you think more investors and founders should produce, their own leadership content? Would you recommend that? And if so, if you do recommend that, where should they start? How should they get going?
I like I said before, I think it's a cheat code. I think you don't know, that classic like saying, like, you don't know who's looking, is totally true. Like, the people that have reached out and talked to me because they've read, my Erewhon piece, my very first one even, like, or my Blank Street piece, and you know, I think it just creates that, it widens your surface area for luck in a very unique way. But my, like, the fair warning is I would probably not go out and start a newsletter tomorrow. I would really think about what's something that I really want to write about a lot and think about a lot, and do it regularly, whether that's once a week or once a month. But I would say find out why. First understand like why you want to create content. Like, what's your purpose? Like, is it secure more customers or get more investor attention? And then sort of backtrack into, all right, if that's the outcome that I want, then like, what is my special way? What's my special voice to sort of make that happen? Like, how am I going to stand out from the myriads of content that's out there? Um And then in terms of like deciding what type of content to create, I would play to your strengths. For me, that's writing. I don't think I'm very great in front of a camera. So I felt like I've always been a good writer, a strong writer, and that's not like a something that a lot of people can do. And so I was like, I'm gonna double down on this. Uh, I definitely played your strengths.
Yeah, well, it's a way to also scale like what you're thinking about and what you're focused on, every day. Like for me, I have incredible guests on, such as yourself, and if we weren't recording this and putting this out there for consumption, then it would be me trying to articulate the impact of the conversation we had and what was unique about it and what was magical about it. And then I would have to articulate that, to somebody maybe one on one. And it's like, well, how is that scalable in any way,
Totally.
right? It's sort of how do you scale the thing that you're already becoming obsessed over and you're passionate about, and how do you pass that along to people? Like I can talk about crypto one on one with investors, and that's great, but it's going to be a lot of the same conversation, and they're not going to necessarily know the questions to ask me to really bring out the information that they want because they're not experienced with that. And so the thought, has been, how do you basically scale that up, make it really shareable? So if somebody's like, hey, who is Safi? And Safi, you can just say, hey, just check out my stuff, right? You'll get a pretty good idea of
Yeah.
who I am, what I'm interested in, and what I'm focusing on. We don't have to like have a conversation for an hour with each person to get through that hurdle. When we do have our
Right.
conversation now, it's already on that common ground.
Totally. I think another benefit of making content, and I'm so glad that you've taken this route as well, is like it forces you to come to terms with like what you believe, like your conclusions about the subject, in a way that like being when you're just a bystander, yeah, you can have your thoughts and opinions, but when you're putting them out there, you have to. It really forces your brain to like uh, really get to the point of what you believe and what you care about, and hopefully have done enough research about it to to not expose yourself. But I think it just like for me, every 2 weeks I have to have an opinion. Like I have to have done my research. I have to push the envelope, about this industry. Um, Even as an outsider to it, I have to have an opinion on it, and I think that's like also really nice as like ambitious people like ourselves that want to do something great with their lives. It's like a 2 week sprint for me. It's a 2 week sprint. It's like going to the gym. It's like doing like another hard set, and I know that the next one's coming up in 2 weeks. And I think it's just like a really cool challenge as well to balance that out with everything else we have going on in our lives.
Well, I love people that have opinions. Now, I'll caveat that in the sense of educated, well researched opinions. I do think we've, lived in a time where a lot of people default to not wanting to commit to to an opinion because they're worried about being wrong. And where this really stands out is when you have discussions about what the future will look like, right? So where
Mm-hmm.
is AI going? Where is crypto going? Where is technology going in general? Where businesses going? What's the future of work? A lot of people, I feel like they dabble in this kind of conversation where they don't commit to anything because they don't want to go on record of being wrong. But of course, to have the courage to commit to something, knowing you are going to be wrong about a lot of things, is I think much more human and much more real, and audiences resonate with that. I love hearing opinions from people, and I may not agree with the opinion, but it's insanely valuable to absorb it and to understand it, and it makes me respect them. As I mentioned, I see this a lot when people are trying to predict future patterns, especially when it comes to investing or technology. Nobody wants to write about, like Nvidia is going nowhere as a company. This is why I think that. And
Sure.
then, Nvidia is the next massive boom. And maybe that's a societal problem, right? Where we critique people too much for being wrong, and we forget that being wrong is a part of being human. Like you're going to be wrong a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's another takeaway for the audience. Like, you guys, especially, I know you have an investment crowd, and that's the most like extreme version of testing if you're right or wrong, right? Like, the bank account's going to go up or it's going to go down based on your prediction. And so I would say, in the grand scheme of things, that is way scarier than just putting your opinions out there. Um, I think there's a power in both succeeding and failing publicly. I just think that, again, like I said before, putting content out there forces your brain to come up with an opinion and a point of view. I think in the same way that, like, it forces you to reckon with your mistakes. If it actually is your fault, you had no control over the outcome. It makes you really consider those in a way that you just wouldn't have to if you didn't put your prediction out there. There's a few folks, I won't name names, but there's a few writers, content creators, entrepreneurs who's who I know have made a lot of wrong calls. And I used to criticize them for it. And I've now come around and reread those opinions and thoughts. And I was like, honestly, they did their research, and I can I can understand the logic in their arguments. It just didn't go their way. But I'm glad that they like put it out there, because it actually helps me think about it from a new way. And so I know that I'm going to be wrong in like probably most of my thoughts in my newsletter, to be honest with you. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to keep on putting it out there. And I think it's one of those things that, like, making mistakes is going to make me better. Um, I really have nothing to lose, and I don't think anyone else does either.
Well, it's also what is a mistake, right? So the bigger mistake is not doing anything or not being making any sort of decision or taking any risk. And also, I mean, you mentioned investments, right? There's a lot of investments that do worse for a while, right? So you can invest in a lot of these different asset classes that aren't attractive at the time, and therefore they're not going to do well. But if your thesis is correct, eventually they'll do better. And it's hard to have that conviction, right? Like, we talk about crypto a lot. We could talk about other assets, but crypto is very unpopular for a while. The prices are way down in bear markets. Your friends that are invested in real estate or stocks are doing way better. You're losing net worth, they're gaining net worth. And
I
my
feel
joke
that.
there is you always look like a genius or an idiot, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
binary, but the truth is it's not linear. Success is not instant. And so, to take the example of your newsletter, I love your strategy where I'm not going to go for having 50,000 subscribers, right? I'd rather have 200 subscribers that are intellectual thinkers that I have two-way interactions with and two-way relationships with. That's a more important success metric for me. And I think what you're kind of saying is, for my definition of success, I believe I have a higher probability of achieving that if I take this approach versus if I just take the standard approach of, trying to get as many subscribers and then bragging about how many subscribers I have and putting out cookie cutter content that will be appreciated by everyone or the most people possible, so they'll continue to subscribe to my newsletter.
I think that what's that phrase? There's riches and niches. I always wanted that one to rhyme, but it never did. I think I think that it's the most true in this year, in 2023 specifically. I think we have saturated all of the open pockets of generic crypto newsletter, generic AI newsletter, generic B2B SaaS newsletter. I think like the audiences of 50,000, 100,000 or more, I think those have been sucked up. And I'm glad. I'm actually really, really glad, because now it forces content entrepreneurs like you and I to find those open spaces and develop those deeper insights, and just be like, okay, that's great 101 content. Like, start here. But then once you're done with that and you're still interested, come hang out with us, and we can actually take you to the next level, and we can hopefully have, again, that one-on-one conversation about Now you're an educated reader. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Like, I'm already getting great feedback from my audience about like, hey, there's this one founder. This is a great story. There's one founder that read my Blank Street piece. He's about to start a ghost kitchen company. If you're familiar with like Cloud Kitchens or Kitchen United or Reef, like he's coming up with the next generation of ghost kitchen businesses. He's like, I'm taking a lot of what you talked about that worked for Blank Street, like their small footprint and their certain locations and sort of like their how lean they are, and I'm going to apply it to my business now. Like I'm changing everything. And so like that's like a perfect case study of like a more like generic overview of Blank Street, although great, wouldn't have gotten him that same insight. And now he's like, now he's off to the races and is like doubling and tripling down on these like core strengths of his business instead of being a more cookie cutter ghost kitchen business. And so like that is like the power really of content is like you're kind of you're potentially changing people's destinies. I hate to be so grandiose, but like that's what's happening here is he would have thought about the business a certain way until he read that piece.
And I'm sure that's what you hope to accomplish, right? I mean, I think at the core, we are all doing things to help people leverage the knowledge and expertise we have, which is what you're doing in your writing, leverage the mistakes that you've made. And it sounds like you're very quick to acknowledge, hey, I made a mistake here. Here's in reflection why it was a mistake or why it wasn't a mistake. That ultimately helps people and it builds a connection. And then, the distribution model of the internet and newsletters just allows you to do that more effectively.
Totally.
That's
I
awesome.
It's a cheat code. I'll keep on saying it until the cows come home. I mean, it just if you have something to say, then you should put it out there. I think it's you don't know where that opinion is really going to lead you.
What's next for Safi and what's next for the physicality?
So I know we didn't talk about this that much, but I did most of my career in venture, being on the sidelines, advising companies, um, thinking about a lot of the same stuff that I write about, but just with a different lens. And I got to operate a little bit at that company, Golden, the crypto company I mentioned earlier. And that was really interesting and fun to work at a crypto company during the tippity top of the bull market and see the kind of gradual decline with regulatory scrutiny, FTX, yada yada yada. You've been there. Your readers, your listeners know about that. I think the physicality is sort of my way right now of making my cake and eating it too, where I get to think really deeply about these businesses and what I'm interested in and what I might want to do in the future, while also getting to talking to people about these subjects and meeting operators and investors and sort of like laying the groundwork, like a lot of groundwork for a series of ideas that I've been about noodling on. Probably going to be in the real world. I think it's going to be real estate related businesses. I have more than one in mind, and uh, I think that like a lot of real estate folks got scared because of the pandemic, and the real estate markets aren't doing too well right now. But I'm taking a lot of the philosophies that I use to create the physicality. So think like, being known well versus being well known, uh, developing a pretty distinct product that's built for a certain type of audience with a pretty clear persona in mind, not having aspirations to go wide but go deep, and applying that to a real world business, that maybe I'll share with you guys on the next episode if it gets off the ground. But I'm really fascinated by what happens if you think about using real estate not for a wide audience but for a small audience, and developing a distinct real estate product for a specific set of needs versus trying to be a generic office building for everybody or a generic multifamily building for everybody. Let's think about what happens when you look a layer deeper and build an office product, a hotel product, a apartment product for a few hundred or a few thousand instead of a few million. So it's unclear right now, but I think the physicality is going to be a big part of that journey, and I don't see myself stopping writing this newsletter for the foreseeable future.
Well, we're excited to hear more. We'll keep our ears
Thanks,
open.
man.
Well,
For
tell our
sure.
listeners where they can subscribe to the Physicality.
Sure. So if you want to just get an introduction to me, finding me on LinkedIn or Twitter would be the best. We can put it in the show notes, but it's just Safi Aziz on LinkedIn. And then the Substack is thephysicality.substack.com. That's for those that really want to learn about the most provocative companies in the real world, and just getting you to pay more attention to your surroundings. That's really, really the point. And if any of you want to talk to me, if anything's been clear on this podcast, is that I'm just pretty open and transparent, and I answer all my emails. So just shoot me a note.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Safi.